we're going to make sure we had last time a couple really small tables. So if you're at a table with one or two and there's room at the table with another color, feel free to merge so you're not sitting alone, because it makes for much better conversation when you're sitting with others. And so we want to make sure we have an opportunity for rich conversation tonight and everybody to hear different perspectives and share. So feel free, if you're sitting alone, to pick up and move to the other color that matches you. Great, and in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and we're excited to continue our conversation.
Okay, welcome back everybody. Again, I'm Scott Leopold with Cooperative Strategies. Just a little housekeeping and a reminder, we do not have to solve the problem or make a decision today. So all this conversation is good, but remember what we're building towards is we're going to have a opportunity for the community at large to provide feedback. And so we're trying to, again, talk through all those benefits and challenges with regards to our facility options. And we'll then have much more deep conversations once we have feedback from the community. So here's our agenda for tonight. We'll discuss some questions that we had from the middle school discussion. Last time we had a little bit more information we wanted to share with you tonight. We'll then review the high school concepts that we talked about in 1920. And so that's kind of the meat of tonight, is reviewing those high school solutions that we talked about, those options. And then trying to just kind of remember what we talked about last time, and then if there's anything we missed that we want to add to that list to get feedback from the community. And that's the majority of our time we spent in small group conversation, kind of taking notes on your flip charts. The test for the flip charts is which way is up. And so we'll judge you whether you do them upside down or not. So that's the IQ test for the day. We did put one more meeting on the schedule for November 11th. And I've got a timeline slide on here too. So we don't have to be ready to go to the community at the end of this meeting. We want to make sure that nobody's feeling rushed, that we've got plenty of time to kind of talk through and understand all these things. Next. I'm not going to go through all of the group norms because it's like 4 or 5 slides, but again, this is an advisory committee to the board. It has the important task of developing long-range facility recommendations to meet the needs of this fast growth district. School facilities are planned and built with the expectation to last 50 to 75 years or more, and they reflect the values of the community they serve. So that's the preamble to the committee charge. So these are some distilled questions that we got from last time. So can we provide some more detail on costs, short-term and long-term capital costs, and what about operational costs? And what are the impacts on performance between the two models? And we're talking about that 850 concept at middle school and that 1200. And what about the impacts on staffing? Next. So this is some information, and we can share the complete study. Park Hill Smith and Cooper, which is an architectural firm here in Texas, they kind of did this third-party study to discuss the transition from 2 to 3 middle schools. And so this is not specific to Dripping Springs. This is just kind of a general white paper that they wrote. And they developed kind of these 2 different metrics to kind of show what our total cost of ownership is. And so they looked at a two middle school model versus a 3 middle school model. And the delta, over the next 40 years ended up being $106 million between those 2 models. We kind of built our own Dripping Springs model based on this, so I'll show that in a couple slides. But it broke down the total cost of ownership by different categories. So initial construction, which is on the bottom, interest or debt service, which is in the orange, renewal, which should be renovations over time to adjust to the program, adaptation, kind of the same thing, and then general maintenance. I think that the big takeaway to this is that the initial construction of a building is about 10% of the expense that building will incur over its life. And so this is one of those things, you think of these buildings like cars. You keep driving it, you end up replacing the tires, the transmission, the windshield, and by the end of it, you've got a new car. So I think there's a Johnny Cash song about that. But again, this is just to really illustrate what that change in that total cost of ownership is. Remembering that we get those larger economies of scale with that 1200 model versus the 3 or 4 850s. Next. So they also showed with this how accountability works, or outcomes of performance with different school sizes. And so what we tracked here is basically low poverty districts in gray, or low poverty schools in gray, and higher poverty schools in orange. And then we show campus enrollment going across. And so you can see 500 all the way up to 1,500. I think what the important takeaway with this is that if you look at the gray dots, they're pretty consistent all the way along. And so there's a lot of different factors that are going to impact success or outcomes. I think socioeconomics has a much higher impact than school size is going to have on outcomes. You can have your own opinion, but based on what I've seen around the country over the years, I think socioeconomics is a pretty strong correlation between that and performance. Next. We then, kind of did this study on staffing, and Holly or Clint, jump in if you need to, but what we did here was we looked at what our current guidelines are. It's not policy, it's just current staffing guidelines. So if we're up to 1,199 students, we get 1 principal, 2 APs, 2 counselors. The teacher staffing will be proportional with the enrollment. So you're going to have more teachers as that goes up. These are kind of those fixed administrative positions that we have. Nurse, principal secretary, receptionist, registrar, PEIM specialist, facilitator of learning and innovation, instructional coaches, that staffing will be identical regardless of size. And if we're looking at total capacity, again, the 4 at 850 gives us the 3,400, the 3 at 1,200 gives us 3,600. Again, we know that Dripping Springs Middle School is currently 1,200. If the standard capacity is determined to be 850, other district uses need to be considered for the excess capacity at Dripping Springs Middle. If we look at that 1,200 and above, 1 principal, we go from 2 to 3 APs, 2 to 3 counselors. Again, the staffing will be proportional, and then all those other positions will be identical regardless of size. And of course, again, our total capacity, 3 to 1,200 is 3,600. And then facilities needed to build out, and again, this is estimated. This could be 50 years away. There's a lot of other factors that come into it, but if we're gonna go with that 850 model, we need 7 schools at 850, and with the 1,200, we need 5. And again, that's not over the next 10 years, that's over the next 50 or 75 years, depending on how long it takes us to get the build out. There's other items, again, that will get more efficient with larger size. So custodial, child nutrition, bus routes, energy, land costs. We'll have fewer transactions to deal with fewer sites. Okay, next. Okay, so this is kind of the Dripping Springs adaptation of that model. What we did here is we kind of just modeled what the total cost of ownership would look like if we went down the 850 route, which is going to be in the blue, or the 1,200, which is going to be in the orange. And so you can see, we have middle school 3 850 built fairly soon, and then within the next 10 years we have middle school 4 at 850, and then we show what that total cumulative cost difference is. So, kind of right before we have that 2031 in there, we're accruing 45% more costs with the 850 model. I knew you guys were going to take pictures of this one. We'll post it. And then once we get, the middle school 5 at 850, we're 20% more. And then there's a period of time we're going to have some lag where it might be 75% more. And then by the time we build middle school 5 at 1,200, we're close. We're at 6% delta with the total cost. But once we build that 7th middle school at 850, that just kind of escalates 50% more, and it keeps going, and it diverges. Just the assumptions in this model, again, three additional middle schools at 1,200, or 5 additional at 850. We assumed a 5% escalation per year, 5% land costs per site, and then an additional $1 million annual operating costs per site per year. And so that's all the things that kind of accumulate into that to kind of show us what that delta is over time. Any questions on this? This is a lot of data. Yes? It's the costs. Yeah, so we escalated, you know, the $67 million school in 2021 might be 100 million by the time it gets out 40 years.
So this is based on the driven stream.
Correct. This is just starting from current state. So we're not, this is just, the bottom is current state. And so we included the cost, the orange line includes the cost for the addition at Sycamore Springs. That's why it starts first, whereas the blue line doesn't include that and it just starts going. Yes?
I have a question. So why are we restricting us to say 850 and 1200 over the 5 and 7 and the bottom around 2 and 3 high schools, 28 bond, was the cost of like $1 million more than 850? That was based upon, you know, basically no breaks and the flow of the schools, and not splitting campuses. So I would think like a 6 would be split by 2 and 3, which is in the middle of 35, and then one of the last thing in that conversation that we got handled, the 4 was restricted by our hand as well. We talked about 1,000 cities and 1,200. So I guess I'm confused as far as about how exactly why that
So the question was, why are we looking at 850 or 1200? Why not something in the middle? And as we kind of talked about this, the current team model is more efficient at that 850 mark and 1200. And if you're in between, you're going to be sharing specialists between grade levels versus having them dedicated.
Right, then you're either building schools that are, like, it doesn't, like, the cost of community are going to break kids up in schools, right? Look at these models that you do all hundreds on the whole building, right? Based on that. I guess that's my question. From a problem.
I'm gonna give you the mic and let Flint or Holly answer it. I don't think everybody can hear.
So basically, from a promises perspective, we promised that we wouldn't break up schools, and both the 5 and 7 models eventually is going to break up schools. We're going to look at a 2 or 3 high school campus. So my question was, 1,000 presumably would be in the middle and allow for 6 middle schools that would feed into either 2 or 3 high schools. I don't know. I guess we're talking about that today, but that was a concern, especially at 850. Like, if you're feeding 2 schools, like at 900 Elementary moving forward, that would work. We're at 30% if you're building 7 or 40% if you're building 5 middle schools. So I don't want us to double down on bad mistakes or kind of the sunk cost fallacy, if you will.
So I think my answer to that is this conversation kind of stems from the last conversation, right? 850 and 1200 was the last conversation that the community was having. And so today, y'all have a paper because we're going to talk about all the feedback and other ideas that we've come up with after looking at all the data from last time and thinking about what else do we want to explore. And so it may be that we need a totally different model and throw out what we've talked about last time and come up with something that really works for Dripping Springs. And so we're picking up where we were last time, moving forward. Today's going to be an opportunity to come up with some other options. So that could be one of them.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, your concern is the alignment with the middle schools to the high schools, as far as number of schools. Okay.
So kind of that long-term structural Creole principle, making sure you get the 20% from the right.
Okay. Good. Yep.
Can you clarify a comment you made? You said something about the team that was currently occurring at the middle school. What was that reference to? I can do the middle school, and teaming at the middle school is we have a team of 6th grade teachers. We do not team in the sense of like we did back when we were at the all of PSNS, where students were on coherent teams, and those 4 teachers had those students. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your
I'm repeating something I heard Dan say at the last meeting, and he's not here today.
That's okay. I'm just, okay.
Okay.
I can figure it out myself.
Okay, yeah, we'll make sure we get that answer. Yes.
Okay, so
So the question was, is there a way to slow the growth? In Texas, not really. There isn't a mechanism that puts the school system at the table when these developments are approved. There are other states that have that. Texas is not one of them. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Yep. So last time, again, we're going to get feedback from the community. I think most groups kind of felt comfortable with that 1,200, but there were some strong opinions, and not every table came to consensus. But I just want to kind of wrap this up, and the next time we'll have that draft questionnaire built around middle schools, so now we can move on to high schools. Okay. Yep.
Sorry, quick question. Is there a reason we can't just keep dripping sprinklers about 1,200 and then 6 more at 850 and then build out the new schools? Whatever we decide, 1,200 or 850?
I don't think that there is a reason. It's just, having things equitable across the district. I don't know. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Part of the data has been including things such as the cost of insuring each building. If you have 3 buildings versus 4 buildings, what's the insurance cost on that 4 building? Is it including the cost of furniture inside an extra building? Is it including the cost of the library for an extra school building? I mean, those sort of data points I think would be critical.
I mean, that's in the costs. And that, we're putting libraries in the 850, and that's why we're using 57 million as the cost for the 850 and 67 as the cost for the 1,200. So those costs are in there. You're getting additional libraries when you get the 7 middle schools versus.
Get a library space.
Yeah.
Books and all the equipment and all the screens and all the classrooms and all that extra stuff. All that.
Yeah.
So I have one question about the cost in Texas, being a property local district recapture as well as at least until we form that system to get tables there. Is that cost accounted for that cost plus premium that tax? Where we're paying 115, 120% on maintenance dollars versus construction, is that accounted for in that estimate?
I mean,
How those costs
let's go back to
that's pretty substantial. Basically, as we're looking at these plans, there's ways we can invest in construction on the front end, like energy efficiency, et cetera, to reduce ultimate costs, how does that plays into ultimate these costs, staff, efficiency, all that stuff, so there's something to build, what degree that's kind of what the cost estimate.
Yeah, it's definitely accounted for in the cost estimates and the long-term operational cost estimates. A couple of the examples on the new buildings that we built, most of the things that we put in a new building, most all of the things that we put into a new building that there's a premium associated with is based on the life cycle efficiency of those systems. So whether it's tilt wall construction or geothermal heat pump HVAC systems, it's because those things have proven to pay themselves off 3 to 4 times over the life of the building. So that is included. And that would be by us doing our model, we're including those types of costs. And so this model, based on dripping springs information, is a little more pertinent to our conversation than even that kind of statewide model.
What I'm saying is that reflective of just what bills paid, or is that reflective of what taxpayers have to pay those bills, the bill plus any recapture taxes, assessments by the state?
It would be the long-term operational cost. I don't know of a way to factor in the recycle or the recapture aspect.
So it's just the normal
Yeah.
balance.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
1,200 quantity per Sycamore, is that the existing footprint of the Sycamore Street School?
There would be an addition on that middle school.
There'll be an addition.
Correct.
Right now, they're using classrooms on the other side of the building.
Correct.
For the middle school. So there'll be an addition on that. So is that addition included in those?
Yeah, it was in the orange line. Okay. Do you want? Sure.
Hi, everyone. I'm the new Assistant Superintendent for Business and Operations. My name is Catherine Knapp. It's nice to be here tonight and to see all of you. I'm a native Austinite, grew up in Eames. Anyway, but just to address the question about the recapture piece. So for starters, we have maintenance and operations, and then we also have interest and sinking. I think a lot of people understand the difference between the two. But the interest and sinking fund is what pays for the bond payments that allow for these construction costs. Their recapture does not touch the INS side at all. So you don't need to incorporate the cost of recapture with, of course, an asterisk that the state legislature could decide to introduce that as part of the funding system. But today, as the law is written, recapture does not apply to the INS side of the tax rate, which is good news for us. In terms of the maintenance and operations side of things, recapture is really a function of two different numbers. Now, there's a lot of details that go into that, but for the sake of this meeting for broad brush, it's your property values and the number of students that attend on a daily basis. Well, the good news is that we're having more and more kids show up to school, so that will reduce our recapture, but the property values is the piece that tends to increase the value of recapture. And so, there's some different ways that the legislature may massage that in the future. They kind of did that yesterday a little bit, but that's really the piece, not the number of buildings that have anything to do with that.
My point is that it's talking about 10% is the INS, is the construction cost, and that's what INS pays for, and 90% of the maintenance cost of the facilities is from the MO side, right?
So
Also from a MO perspective, the state currently offers $700 per student based on your average enrollment. So if we can reduce the maintenance cost of these buildings, that allows more money for education in the classroom. So that's kind of the points I was making, trying to figure out whether we're prioritizing ways to save money.
Yeah, we can talk more. Yeah, we can talk more about the details. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that INS recapture is not part of that, but I'm happy to visit with you more about that later. But thank you for the question.
Okay, I think every table's got at least one or at least two flip charts. So let's take 15 minutes and just digest any other thoughts that we have on middle schools before we move on to high schools. And remember, the first test is which way is up. Okay, lots of good feedback. So I will take all this and we'll have a draft questionnaire next time that we can wordsmith and make sure that it's objective that we can share with the community. Okay, moving on. So here's our revised timeline. I wanted to put a third meeting in here, so we're calling it committee meeting 2.5, November 11th. And then we'll be looking to go to the community either the 18th of November or the 30th, not sure yet. But we'll make sure we get this solidified, but we want to meet again on the 11th just to make sure that we've got plenty of time to talk through all this. Okay, high school discussion. So what we'll do is we'll go through the concepts from 1920, and then we'll have a small group discussion. If you need more paper, raise your hand, and when we start discussing, I'll bring more paper around. And then we'll report out and make sure that, if there's any other ideas for high school, we're gonna make sure we get those out tonight. Okay. So the first concept we had was a 9th grade center. And so this example was from Pasadena ISD. The high school opened in 2003, and then due to overcrowding, 9th grade center opened in 2016. I wanted to note here the proximity of the two buildings are relatively close, and that's something that's important to consider. Next slide. So these are benefits and challenges that this committee came up with last time. And so this is review. We can edit these, we can, we can do whatever we want. So benefits, it works towards keeping the small town feel. It's less costly to build and operate than a second comprehensive high school. Requires less land. We don't need full competition athletic fields at a 9th grade center. Facilitates a gentler transition into high school. We're limited by the capacity of the school that it feeds. So if the high school capacity is 2,500, The ninth grade center would need to be roughly a third of that, so 800 to 900. It does add another transition for students. It may limit access to advanced programming and extracurriculars if you're at 2 different sites. May decrease parent involvement. And so if you're only there for a year in that building, you're not going to be as invested as you are in the other schools where you're there, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever. Will likely increase traffic congestion. Based on the projections, it would reach 120% capacity in 27, 28. One of the big picture questions, just as a reminder, I think that the build-out number for high school was somewhere near 7,300. And so if we're going to go down this route, I think this goes to Martin's point, be considerate of how many we need and what that capacity is. Other considerations, most systems that have these place them in close proximity to the high school. The building could be repurposed for another use once it's outgrown. So that's another consideration for that. Okay, next slide. This is that combo 910, 1112 facility. And so you would essentially build a second building that would serve as a 910, 1112. The example we have, this is Jasper High School, Plano West High School in Plano. Jasper opened in 1996 as a 910 building with 2,400 or 240,000 square feet. Plano West Senior High opened in 1999, was renovated from a previous high school as the 1112 building. They're somewhat far apart. They're probably 3 or 4 miles apart. Next slide. Benefit, again, it works towards keeping the one high school feel, requires less land. Again, we don't need full competition athletic fields for a 9th grade or 9th and 10th grade building. Also facilitates a gentler transition to high school. It would accommodate projected enrollment beyond 2930. Nearly the same costs as a comprehensive high school. These are the challenges. We do have another transition. It may limit access to advanced programming for students in grades 9 through 10. So if you've got, an AP Calc that's only offered in high school, and you've got a 9th or 10th grader that could take that course, that could be difficult. It could impact extracurricular activities and would likely increase traffic congestion depending on placement. So other considerations, the district owns property on Darden Hill Road that would accommodate a 910 building, but just think of the traffic in both places. You've got both facilities district-wide at that point. Most school districts that have these in place have them in close proximity to each other. It could theoretically start out with this configuration and then transition to 2 separate comprehensive high schools. Okay, next. So this is one that I crossed off because this was the idea of a choice campus. And since we talked about this, every single one of these that I've seen hasn't worked to draw kids off and the numbers that they need to be drawn off. And so we talked about, having, some creative programming to draw kids off, but I haven't seen one besides Manatee Tech, which is a technical school that draws from the whole county. I haven't seen one of these work. And so I kind of crossed this off, but if you think it warrants further discussion, please bring that up in your group. Next. Next. Okay, this is the big one. Continue to expand the current high school. And so this is our example here. This is Allen ISD, Allen High School. So they've got 5,163 students in 10th through 12th grade, and they've got a 9th grade center that's a little bit off the map to the south, just to the south of it. It's on 177 acres. It's a massive, it's a college campus. Next slide. It technically keeps a one high school community, but we're talking a really big building. Increased programmatic opportunities due to size. Challenges if we were to do it here. Current high school core facilities would need to be expanded. So this space is not large enough for 7,300 kids. Depending on land acquisitions, we have to acquire land around this site to make it work. It may be just as expensive as constructing additional schools. Vastly increased traffic. So all the high school students in the district would be coming to this site, and we all know how great 290 is. Reduced opportunities for leadership and extracurricular participation. So you have one varsity football team, there's going to be cuts. Feasibility and growth capacity at the current high school site are contingent on infrastructure improvements. So don't know if we have the capacity for water and sewer on this site. That would definitely have to be an expense that would be incurred. Other considerations, most districts that have a single high school have a much smaller geographical area. And so they're much more compact and much more dense than we are here. Again, the high school projection to build out is 7,300. In the long term, this would likely require multiple construction projects. And so this is sustained construction as we grow on this site. Okay, next. Additional comprehensive high school. This is pretty simple. Example we have here, I know there's Texas examples, but this is Fishers, Indiana. Opened in 2003 as a 9th grade campus, and then expanded in 2008 as a second high school. I think that's why we put this example in here. Next. Can create the most long-term capacity, provides equitable availability of academic programs, programs and experiences compared to the existing high school, reduces traffic congestion because you'd have multiple zones throughout the district, allows for more opportunities for student leadership and participation in co- and extracurricular activities, reduction in commuting distance for many students, accommodates projected enrollment beyond 2930. Challenges, could be the most costly option, and it may compromise the feeling of community unity. Consideration, again, the district owns property in Darden Hill, would accommodate a second high school. The high school projection at build out is 7,300. Based on the build out numbers, we need additional facilities beyond. We need 3 high schools to accommodate that 7,300 eventually. Next. So this is kind of the summary of all of these together and what they look like. I crossed out that choice campus in the middle. I'm going to leave this up. Does anybody have any big picture questions about high school before we just start discussing? Yes?
It's not necessarily specific to DSIC, but we talk about a county-wide technical schools, that's something that each county has discussed, we're getting into an era, I feel like it's more personalized education for specific skills, and we have some stuff here, but there's a big difference between a technical school and what it offers.
I don't know the answer to that, but we can definitely look into it. Oh. Is that good?
That's fine.
Okay. Yes?
You have a plan around this school, would it be available for us to do anything, maybe during the week, or I'm pretty sure it's here. I live in High Point, and today I left my house at 7:50, and I got back, dropped my kid, my son here off, went straight home, and got home at 9 o'clock.
Shocking experience. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges of trying to continue to expand this facility is the availability of land around, and the availability of enough land instead of maybe smaller parcels that can be cobbled together over time and multiple transactions creates a really complicated kind of long-term outlook for that prognosis.
Yep, Mark?
I was just gonna ask, I think there was several $1 million in last bond for land acquisition, how do you think of that has been spent? Is there having plans for those or not? And it's also maybe less the high school for sale. It's really, I'm curious, why is that $100 million in tax?
So I think there were, of the $9 million that was in the 2018 bond for land, roughly half of that has been expended. And so that's one of the things as we move forward with what could be done with those unspent funds would be potential future land purchases for other facilities.
Okay. Any other questions before we turn you loose? Oh.
What's the one, Jeremy,
So the ninth grade center, that would give us capacity for 8 to 10 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
At the end of Kim, we'll probably add.
Yeah, you're at another decision point, whether it's another high school ninth grade pair. And, you know, looking at the 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 years plus, depending on, does that make sense now? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so I end up over here.
What's the cost difference between building a middle school and building a ninth grade center?
I don't have it right here, but it's something that I can calculate as we're discussing.
My reason for asking is you have PSMS in close proximity to the existing high school that could be converted into a ninth grade center and then build a less expensive middle school. Just a thought. So where it says land acquisition there for a ninth grade center, it could asterisk below.
Okay, that's a good, I would write that down as we're discussing. That's a good consideration. Okay, anything else? So, big questions. Are we missing anything? Is there anything on here that's just a terrible idea? Tell us why. Is there anything on here that we don't want to share with the community? That we don't want to get feedback on? So, that's what this is for. And so, if you've got your same scribe before, if you want to vote somebody else to do it, you can. But we'll do the same kind of gallery walk thing. I'll kind of hop around, and let's go for 30 minutes and see where we are.
Okay, so what we came up with, we think that we just need to scrap the idea of the ninth grade center and scrap the idea of just keeping one large high school. We need to prioritize long-term solutions, as in multiple high schools, versus just kicking the can down the road with just short-term solutions.
So we had a discussion about, from a high school standpoint, we're looking at 7,300 students long-term that'll max out this school district in the boundaries of the district. So what we decided was an additional high school would be most feasible. If you think of what we have here right now, 3 2,500 student high schools would be what would this land area and the projected population, student enrollment would accommodate. One of the things that we talked about that's very important that all of us need to consider, we're a town of one high school and everybody's Tiger Nation. And everybody's very proud of being the Tigers. So one thing that happens in every community you're looking at going to a second high school is, do we break that model and become something else? Aside from facility needs, that's an important thing as a community to talk about, and a group like this needs to address that. You can go the route of a Hutto, and Hutto said no matter what schools we add, no matter what high schools we have, we're all Hutto, we're all Hippos. You can all be Tigers, or it can be something else, but it'd be important, facilities aside and enrollment aside, to address that issue. As you move forward, it'll shape how you look at doing high schools in the future.
We also said an additional high school. There's roughly 20 new subdivisions going in, and currently the high school is nearing the capacity, and it just financially makes sense for our group. We already have land that's opposite side of town, and so it'll provide more opportunity for students, extracurricular, academic. It'll provide collaboration between the campuses, and we would love for it to be as equitable as possible.
You guys finished 20 minutes ago.
We also agree with adding additional comprehensive high schools and trying to keep them at about the size that our current high school is at. One of the things that we talked about was we already have the property over off Darden Hill. We can add another high school at this time, potentially, but to go ahead and start looking for land to acquire for the third high school so that we can have that before too many subdivisions come and scoop up all the land. But we also really talked about that feel of keeping it kind of that small town feel, or at least, as the other table was saying, the Tiger Nation, really keeping us all very Dripping Springs oriented.
Good evening. We talked about transitioning DSMS to a 9th grade center, and we really like the idea of a second high school option at the Darden Hill location, as well as a 9th grade center over there. So you would have 2 9th grade centers and 2 high schools.
Okay. Okay, so our first choice, as hard as it, as much as it pains me, I guess, would be to have a second high school. That would definitely be our first choice. We were just wondering if we would share the football stadium like they do at Hayes. That's something to think about. Second choice would be a freshman center. One of our questions, could the old Walnut be renovated into a 9th grade center? And then it kind of gives us about 8 years to see the actual growth that's coming in if we had a 9th grade center.
Get my 10,000 steps in there.
So we did a quick, where does everybody stand type of approach, and as we went around the table, we were all, yeah, it's probably time to go to a second high school. But to everyone's credit here, it was, well, let's explore some of these other options. We have the same opinion, but we're here to explore these other options. And, one of the things that we talked about was like the Walnut Hills, or I did that again, Walnut Springs. Oh, it's that speaker. I'm in the spot. So we did explore. Here we go. We did explore the 9th grade center and turning Walnut Springs into one, but we viewed all that as kind of a stopgap. It's why pour more money into renovating a facility that we already have, and to quote one member of our table, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. We're going there anyway. We're not going to have some high school that's 7,300 kids. It's time to rip the Band-Aid off. It's time to move forward. And we talked about a lot of the other things that you all talked about more opportunities with kids and that sort of thing. So I won't belabor that point. But that's a quick summary of our discussion.
Gotta put some duct tape on the floor.
I've been voluntold. So a couple of the considerations, in addition, we'll get to that, that's the most important piece, but I just want to build up to it. So a couple of considerations, a thought about the increased ability of kids to participate in a whole bunch of different programs or multiple programs at a somewhat smaller school. So I think we were pretty well landing on the additional comprehensive high school, which really just follows in the footsteps of, we're very soon to be a 2 HEB town. And so I think that's probably going to be as divisive as anything. So having 2 HEBs and 2 high schools just kind of seems about right.
So we kind of landed at kind of what everyone else did as well, going to a comprehensive second high school. We did spend a lot of time talking about a 9th grade center, and one thing we talked about, like, we have a lot of students who accelerate, and it's already a challenge for our elementary kids accelerating to the middle school, and the middle school students accelerating to the high school. So then you add another layer of 9th grade students accelerating to the high school. It's a lot of moving parts, and so also just the lack of belonging, I would imagine students would feel in that 9th, we all know we have middle school teachers here. When you're stuck in the middle, you kind of lose that sense of belonging. You just add another layer on that, a 9th grade center, that losing that sense of belonging. So yeah, that's where we landed on, another comprehensive high school. Not Miss McGillivray though. She brings that belonging to the middle school. So yeah.
That was so much easier than the middle school conversation. No, I think that's good, and that's great feedback. I'm impressed, because I thought we were gonna have to go 3 or 4 meetings and talking about this, just based on the middle school discussion, so I think that's good. At this point, does anybody else have any other questions? What we'll be doing from here is, we'll put together a presentation that will kind of outline all of this that we can share with the community, and we'll have a survey that will go with that, and then we can talk about that in detail at our next meeting on the 11th. Yes?
We had some discussion about, I'm not so sure we still understand the benefit. Basically compare and contrast the 9, 10, and 9 grade centers.
Okay.
And also, I think that it's not going to be really any additional conference basketball, it would be 2 of the city, 2,500 versus 9 grade centers.
Sure.
So I think we need to be transparent.
Just long-term rather than,
So I think that whole
no, that's good. Perfect. Okay.
Also, we did have an important conversation about sports, where we have 9 grade centers, South Carolina high school, 2,500 passionate for athletics, CIL, versus 2,500 pushing the low end of 6A. So that was a conversation actually about measurements of success in the CIL.
So 9th grade center plus the 10, 12 gives us a higher.
You'd be more competitive in 6A. And currently, we don't know, school districts are making, we didn't know if we had to decide on where other schools were going for schools, where that was PSIC, long-term, sports for that.
That's something we can get that for next time. Okay? Well, I'll take these and post these up, and we can kind of gallery walk, and you can kind of take a look at the middle school discussions, all that output too, and then we'll meet next time. So thank you very much.